Breaking down the best fits for the 2026 rookie class. That's what we're talking about today on Stealing Bananas. I'm Ben Gretch. You can find the Stealing Signals newsletter at bengretch.substack.com. With me, as always, is Shawn Siegele. You can find all of his great work over at RotoViz. When I say we're breaking down the best fits, we're kind of talking about this today from the team side, not necessarily talking about the prospects a massive amount. You guys kind of know the names. We know that it's kind of a little bit of a weaker class, but we're thinking about going through the different teams, kind of thinking where we think these rosters are at post free agency, whether teams have specific needs they still need to fill, whether offenses could look a lot better if they had individual players added. It's a little bit of like a depth chart breakdown in some cases. For our purposes, it's going to mostly be the fantasy relevant positions, the offensive skill players, and those sorts of things. I at this time of the offseason certainly don't even have much of an understanding of how good the relative offensive lines are in those things. The whole defensive conversation is not really one to necessarily have within the scope of the conversation. But Shawn, it's in past years, we've talked about the ways that different wide receiver rooms have come together or receiving cores, and then sort of what we think about the different running backs. We have different offensive coordinators in a bunch of spots, what type of, schemes these offenses might want to run and how they might be able to execute those things with the fantasy relevant players that they currently have, post free agency, heading toward the draft, and then what kinds of moves they could potentially make that could positively impact things for the team, as well as what types of teams we're looking at and saying, okay, we like this quarterback. We like these pieces around them. If they had an impact player at whatever, this position, it would be a good landing spot for that player, say running back. And then, that's going to help us inform what happens in the draft or our opinions of what happens in the draft.
And this is a really fun exercise, I think, because just having some calibration before the draft actually kicks off can be pretty helpful. Not overreacting to individual landing spots, not getting too high or too low on what teams are doing. Now, obviously we're going to get high and low on what the teams are doing, but these types of calibration exercises, I think, really help when we're working through what our rankings end up being as well. And Ben, it's fun. Obviously, we could do this 5, 6, 7 hours when we're talking about the 32 teams. Some teams will have less really to break down and we can run through quickly. Some will be pretty fascinating, I think, for more extended discussion. One of the things that keeps popping up for me as I work through the class, and I am going to have just a huge cheat sheet out for people next week as they go into the draft preparation, and then obviously their rookie drafts immediately following, especially there with the FFPC. I have a dynasty breakdown as well. Ben, I always keep going back to our team where it's so weird, the things that have happened on it. We may occasionally take some digressions over there, but working through this class, you have the star, obviously, at running back, but then you don't have other options. And so that affects teams like, for example, the Super Bowl champions, who are still trying to address that position. Wide receiver is really interesting because the first round group is really pretty strong. I don't know that we have a dramatically worse group there than we normally do, with the exception of not having a star. Carnell Tate at the top is really weird because he definitely doesn't have those star characteristics. And when you're starting off with whoever drafts that first guy or the team that takes the plunge earliest, and usually those are the worst teams, that they may get a weaker player and certainly aren't going to get someone who completely changes their offense. That's, disappointing for them. We want as many teams to be good as possible. Tight end, kind of interesting, some potential stars. So the issue then, though, at wide receiver is similar to the issue at running back, where once the first round is over, I'm pretty skeptical that you're going to be able to make picks that really influence teams. Now, again, that's not necessarily that out of the usual, but we often have a number of names on day 2 that are pretty exciting. I don't know that we're going to have that. And so a lot of this exercise will end up filtering back to the first round, because that's when you really can change your team. That's where, if you make a selection, it probably does influence the guys who are already on the roster a great deal.
And obviously the big name at the top of the first round is Jeremiah Love, the difference-making running back. There's several wide receivers as well being discussed throughout the first round. Where do you want to start? You just threw out the Titans to me as we were kind of talking about the exercise pre-draft. They're being mocked, Jeremiah Love, a decent amount, which seems like a luxury pick to me. That you and I both agree that the idea that running backs don't matter is overly simplistic and all of those types of things. At the same time, what we saw with Ashton Ginty last year sort of is a big reason why, the whole idea of running backs don't matter existed, or it has existed, or continues to exist, which is, if you don't have any support around you, it's really difficult as a running back to just do everything. If you don't have a great offensive line, if you don't have wide receivers or playmakers that are attacking down the field to create space to run into for you to then make big plays, or some combination thereof, some players around you, a quarterback that forces defenses into nickel formations enough, out of base defense, respecting the pass. And then you can add onto the situation you're given. I would feel like Tennessee's a tough spot from the perspective of, I like the Wan'Dale Robinson ad, but you're talking about Wan'Dale Robinson and Calvin Ridley and some rookies that got a lot of playing time in year one, sort of out of necessity, because Ridley only ran like 100 routes last year. They don't even have Okonkwo anymore. They brought in Daniel Bellinger as a potential tight end. They have Gunnar Helm, who's interesting, I think, but there's not a lot of threatening playmakers, in the passing game for Cam Ward. I would think this team would be looking more that direction, but it seems that a lot of the mocks like Love to the Titans. I don't really love that fit for Love either.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it works very well either direction, as you point out. The team needs from NFL.com: wide receiver, edge, running back, offensive line, linebacker. I guess I would quibble with that. I don't see how a team that has Tony Pollard and Tyjae Spears, and we're actually always wanting more work for Spears now. To get more work for Spears, he would have to stay healthy, right? He's got to do his part of it. But when you have a solid 1-2 punch there and your roster is bad, I simply don't think you can take the running back. I don't think you can take it strategically. Doesn't mean that they won't do it, because Love, if you remove position value, is the best player in this draft. And so there is some temptation to go ahead, make that the foundation and build off it. But for the reasons you said, you think about these big splashes at running back recently. You think about what Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry did a couple years ago when they moved to the Eagles, when they moved to the Ravens. You think about the season that Jonathan Taylor had while Daniel Jones was healthy last year. You think about what the Chiefs have done this season, trying to signing Kenneth Walker to try and get better at running back. Running back is the last piece of the puzzle. It's not the first. And I think it's a really savvy addition for loaded teams, right? Especially the way the NFL currently works. We just saw the Seattle Seahawks win the Super Bowl because they could run the ball in the Super Bowl. And that was the only thing that either team could do. The Patriots couldn't do either thing. I think that you want to do that. I don't think that you want Robert Saleh to start off his tenure with the Titans, someone who has the potential to put together maybe not an all-time great defense, but a great defense, right? You want this team to be Cam Ward. You want it to be the defense, and you need to throw the ball. This basically has to be an edge rusher or a wide receiver. And the problem at receiver is that the value there is going to be in that like 12 to 25 range. Can you move down and still make that pick? Everybody knows that you need to move down in these types of situations. If you're a team like the Titans, that tends to take away a lot of the leverage you have to do it. I would prefer to see them move down, because when you have Robinson, Ridley, and then, I mean, I like DK and Iowa Manor, but they're going to be complementary pieces if they hit. That's basically best case scenario, right? You need a wide receiver on this team, and it is just far too early to take any of the guys who are available in this draft.
Yeah, you need multiple pieces as well. If you can get future capital, this is not we're one piece away. 2026 is going to be a competitive year roster. This is we're looking to 2027, because in the NFL, if you hit on 2 good draft classes back to back, and if you add additional capital by moving down and you have extra picks for 2 straight years, you could potentially be competitive on the second year of that if Ward ends up hitting. This year to me is more about getting more out of Ward in a new offense, in a new situation. Yeah, if they move down, maybe a wide receiver makes more of a fit at those spots. Where would you so I've seen a lot of love to the Giants talk. It seems more recently they're not that one never made any sense to me. We obviously love Cam Scatterbo, and then they also still have, to your point about how the Titans have both Pollard and Spears, they also still have Tyrone Tracy. Yes, Scatterbo's coming off a major injury, but you have 2 pretty good running backs on rookie deals. That one never made a ton of sense to me. It looks like in more recent mocks, we're seeing less love to the Giants discussion. I'm kind of looking through and trying to figure out where we should expect him. I know there's been some talk about Washington a little bit further down the top 10. They added Rashad White this offseason. Is there a spot in the top 10? Do you think maybe he may slide? I haven't been watching the mocks a ton, but I'm kind of just clicking around looking at it now. Is there a spot that you think makes a ton of sense?
Yeah, I mean, you think about, again, team needs for the Giants, and it's basically everything except running back. And so are you saying that the running back is that much better that you don't have other names that you would pick here? This is another team that really needs a wide receiver. Now, do they need a wide receiver as badly as the Titans? I mean, probably not if Malik Neighbors is healthy, but you think about what this team could be in the very short term. If Jackson Dart is the playmaker that he looked like as a rookie, and this is a very, very fun starting spot here with, I mean, again, just his competitiveness, his playmaking. That was one of the most exciting stories of last season, but it was buried because he got hurt a couple times because the Giants were so bad. You have the coach firing, you have both Neighbors and Scatterbo go down. If some of those injuries play out a little bit differently, we're talking about the Giants as one of the most exciting teams for the 2026 season. And it's again a situation where you have John Harbaugh and you think about his tenure with the Ravens. I mean, how many situations did the running back really lead things there? I mean, so much of the tenure in the second half, obviously, is Lamar Jackson. If you have Jackson Dart, not exactly in the same vein, but bringing some things to the table. I mean, that Derrick Henry piece, again, kind of the last piece, not the first piece. This, again, has to be, I think, a defensive selection, or, I mean, you'd love to see the trade down. But the wide receivers fit better in this if you have Neighbors as the star, and then complementary pieces like Tate, like Lemon. Those guys probably are reaches at this point, but at least make more sense philosophically for this offense. The other big position that they get mocked for is that tackle. You certainly would like to see more protection for Dart, anything that they can do to create more holes for the running back. You probably need to approach it from that perspective, as opposed to saying that Love just rescues the entire offense. It would be very fun to have Dart, Neighbors, Love. But again, as you're building out an overall roster, you really need to resist that temptation. You mentioned Love, where would I like to see him go? These teams in the top 10 just need a ton. And so really he makes sense in terms of being a quote-unquote good pick for none of them. But it ends up being a lot more fun if you go to the Commanders and you're with Jaden Daniels and a team that actually has a bit of a hole there, or you go to the Saints and you're potentially in similar to the Bijan Robinson situation. You're in a division that is weak. You're in a division that plays a lot of games in domes and has shootouts. You have that dual threat ability. We're talking about, I mean, if he ends up with New Orleans, then I mean, we're looking at Love and Bijan Robinson as these two guys who just week after week compile massive stats. That's far better for him, for fantasy, for fun, than if he ends up actually hitting on either the 4th or the 5th pick here with the Titans or the Giants.
Well, the Saints have Travis Etienne now as well. I mean, we have all these new additions that are, we got to familiarize with as well. But I was looking at the Giants here, and as you were talking about that, I'm interested in the Jackson Dart development. I really like Jackson Dart. I thought he was strong last year. It fell off a little bit late. Obviously, you have a coach firing and sort of a different situation down the stretch than they were sort of hoping to have. Obviously, no neighbors. Wan'Dale Robinson is basically one of your top receivers. He's this smaller slot guy. You're doing 3 wide receiver stuff. They did a decent, I think, amount of the multi-tight end stuff. But it seems like when Harbaugh comes in here, he's certainly thinking we're going to go that direction. He did a lot of that with the Ravens. He brings in Isaiah Likely. He also brings in Patrick Ricard, which I didn't really realize. I'm looking at their depth chart now, but I mean, it seems pretty clear Harbaugh wants to do some of the 2 tight ends. They still have Theo Johnson, who they really like. They have Chris Manhertz, who's a longtime veteran, but a blocking tight end, a guy that does get playing time, doesn't run routes or anything, but teams have always liked him as a blocker, as a third tight end type, right? But you have Likely, you have Theo Johnson, and you have the potential for Ricard to be essentially the second tight end in a power formation, really the second running back. He's a fullback, right? But he's like a 300-pound fullback. That's how the Ravens have, used him as a move guy at times. Like moved him up to like an offset tight end, whatever, inline formation at times as well. Or inline alignment. The 2 receivers they brought in, Darnell Mooney and Calvin Austin, I mean, not difference makers. Mooney is one of those guys that can play on the outside, can get vertical, can play in 2 wide receiver sets opposite neighbors. They still have Slayton. So they lose Wan'Dale Robinson, this like smaller slot receiver. And I feel like the types of players they're bringing in speak to movement toward the heavier formations, probably more under center, right? It's the whole knock on Dart coming out of college was that he was in this sort of gimmicky Ole Miss offense that was very shotgun heavy. It was very RPO, one read, all these things. And I made the case at a decent amount of last season that even despite that, Dart showed some poise and some maturity in handling the pocket and those things early in the year. But I do know that like some of the grading stuff didn't have him as great inside the pocket. Like when I made the mistake of saying something about Tyler Shuck online and social media went crazy. The big thing that all the Saints fans want to repeat to you, and they will tell you all offseason, is that Shuck graded better inside the pocket than Dart, which whatever, you can have that. Obviously that is the more sticky element of quarterback play. And there's a lot of reasons why people would gravitate to that stat, but it's a very small sample. Their relative prospect profiles, their relative ages. I mean, then I started getting told it doesn't matter how old Shuck is. Well, it matters for his development. And for Dart, he was playing at age 21 last year. It matters for his development as well that he was playing so young, because long-term, the younger players tend to have a higher ceiling to grow from that point. It matters what these players did relative at relative ages in college as well, a longer perspective than just like 9 or 10 starts this year. Anyway, we're not relitigating the Dart and Shuck thing. I'm just saying I think the grading on Dart was, some of it was talking about him not being as good in the pocket necessarily. Are we going to see like him in a completely different offense than we saw in college and last year? And what is that going to mean for him? But he probably has to learn to play that way. I know you're fired up
about it because Matt Nagy is going to be leading the way.
Yeah, that's not the guy that I want making the transition, but he's going to probably have to learn to play that way because that's the direction the NFL's headed. Obviously, we've talked about this, more of the sort of old school formations and some of those things, not so much of the shotgun spread, college style. Yeah, just run the RPOs, all this stuff, because the defenses did evolve in a way that was basically like, yeah, we're going to make that stuff harder to do, and the direction that offenses are going to swing back is we want to get heavier, we want to be forcing you out of those nickel formations, or we'll run on your nickel formations. If we force you out of the nickel, then, we'll try to throw against your base from our heavier sets with our more athletic tight ends, with Isaiah Likely, with Theo Johnson as receiving weapons, as opposed to, a Wan'Dale Robinson, who's not going to help you in the run game. So this roster seems to be headed that way. Anyway, I just think that's interesting as far as Dart and as far as the Giants are concerned. I agree with you. I think they should be making a defensive selection here. The pieces they have, if Neighbors can come back healthy, and if you can use those tight ends interchangeably, Likely and Theo Johnson, and then like Mooney's now your whatever you want to call it, second, third receiving threat with those tight ends, and there's a lot of a split behind Neighbors. I think that can work a little bit like, JSN, and then you had AJ Barner and, a little bit of the other tight ends there. And then the other receivers, Cooper Kupp didn't do much. They're rotating. Torrey Horton has some touchdowns. You can do some different things with your rotations when you're using some of the heavier formations. And anyway, maybe their offensive roster, maybe they have it where they want it, is sort of what I'm saying, with these like small pieces that they've added as they move into a different direction.
So this question doesn't really have an answer. Honestly, feel free to wildly speculate in that situation. But they have the 37th pick coming back then in round 2. In the vast majority of mocks, you don't see any of the impact receivers making it that far, but there can be a little bit of a tendency in the direction of elevating some of these fun guys, the receiving position. You don't know what's going to happen in the draft. You would certainly want to be open to the idea that one of the receivers, the last guy, before what I see is just a massive tier break, where really the next time you would want to look at receiver would be round 3, maybe even the beginning of day 3, round 4 and beyond. So if you're thinking about positionally, does that put more pressure on? I think we both actually think they could start with this roster, but does that put more pressure on you to go ahead and reach for the receiver, or just go ahead and draft defense? The players that are most frequently mocked, Sonny Styles, Caleb Downs, those seem like the right direction to go to start off the Harbaugh era. And
probably what Harbaugh wants to do, right? Like that's kind of, obviously his background was technically on special teams for the most part, but what he did with the Ravens as a head coach for a long time was build teams that had a lot of talent on the defensive side of the ball. Use these heavier formations, use multiple tight ends, played a little bit more of a run style on offense. Some of that was obviously the Lamar stuff, because you go back to some of the Flacco years, they were throwing a decent amount of times, but Flacco was never like, he was throwing a lot of passes, but a lot of short passes. That's more like the Flacco style. He's never throwing for 400 yards. He was throwing 40 times for 250 yards with a really low ADOT, a lot of the time. It was still kind of a ball control type of offense. And so, I think, like you said, to start off the Harbaugh era with a impact defensive player feels more like what he would want to build roster-wise. Yeah, I think you're right. There's some pressure to potentially add that impact player at the receiver, but then my immediate thought is, well, if you're going to go to more 2 wide receiver sets, why did you sign both Mooney and Austin? Why'd you bring in 2 cheap veterans? They're both on 1-year deals. They're not huge deals or anything. But then you still have Darius Slayton on this roster. Like, you pretty quickly wind up with a logjam at wide receiver. They actually have 12 receivers already on the roster, with a lot of the other guys that are back. Still have Isaiah Hodgins on the roster. Still have Jalen Hyatt on the roster. Special teamer Gunnar Olszewski or whatever, Olszewski, I never know how to say his name. Xavier Gibson is on this roster as well, former Jets return man. Seems like they're going to have some type of special team presence in their final wide receiver depth chart. There's a lot of names here, which obviously it's very early in the offseason, but adding a real impact wide receiver then gives you a lot of like these high floor types that you seem to have been building a lot of depth so that you could get secondary routes, especially if Neighbors is not ready. Now you have a logjam for that type. And maybe that's fine. Maybe you just cut a Calvin Austin who doesn't have an impactful contract or whatever. But it does seem like the smaller moves they made at wide receiver do mitigate that pressure that you were discussing a little bit. And maybe the wide receiver move is one for, next year's draft, right? And you get Neighbors Robin to his Batman in the 2027 class where you think there's a little bit more strength at that position. Probably the way that I would look at it based on, particularly the Likely and Ricard moves and kind of like where the offense might be moving formationally. What's another? I mean, I haven't been like super plugged into the mocks, and so I'm trying to figure out what the most interesting teams are. These two teams that we just talked about, the Titans and the Giants, I think are very interesting because of the discussions of Love, because of the new regimes. The Browns pick right after them at 6. You have Todd Monken taking over there. The Browns have a lot of needs.
Yeah, instead of listing team needs here, it's just entirely new roster, right? Take your pick of who you think the best players are. This one to me, though, does actually feel like a place that you can start if you are the Browns, and in part because they have that second first-round pick. And unlike these other teams that we're discussing that need the receivers, they sit perfectly with that 24th selection to get one of the first-round receivers who I would all put in the same basket. Individual, pundits, scouts, analysts are going to have their favorites, but they don't separate so much that I think you have to get the top guy. If you have a guy that is really separated in this draft, then maybe you need to go back and look at how confident you can be in what that process is. Now, that's not to say that there won't be someone who jumps out from this, and the people who are on him are going to be like, yeah, we told you. So that part of it is
But there's
fun,
red flags.
Right?
There's red flags in all the profiles, and you have to acknowledge that.
And so when you come back here and you have the 6th pick and you have the 24th pick and you have Shedeur Sanders and nothing, I mean, this is a situation that I think is super straightforward where you have to make that offensive line pick at 6 and stabilize some things for your QB there. And then you have to make the receiver pick at 24, which does mean, as we're looking at this depth chart of Jerry Jeudy, Cedric Tillman, Isaiah Bond, none of those guys are going to be the number one as rookie in 2026. It's going to be a rookie number 1 here, which means that someone who is not one of the first receivers drafted, a first round pick, but not one of the very top guys, is going to be the top wide receiver on a team that will probably throw inefficiently, but will have to throw a lot, right? And you get that Chris Olave type of thesis for the player. Then I think this one is straightforward. I also think it's quite a bit of fun.
You do. I think the quarterback play is going to be poor enough that, and the efficiency poor enough that I would be more concerned, especially when you have, I think Harold Fannon's a legit young tight end. And when you have the presence of him there, I don't think Jerry Jeudy is going to just go quietly into the night for the rest of his career. Horrible season last year, but presumably has the potential to rebound a little bit and at least be a contributor. Cedric Tillman missed time, but potentially still a contributor. The guys that they have, if they're only thrown for like sub 250 yards a game, you have a good tight end. I think they're going to want to run the ball with Judkins, and I feel like this is a spot that's, and then you get the outdoor games and the fantasy playoffs. So you get some windy games down in Cleveland. So, this feels like a spot to me where you get a late first round rookie, and it feels great, but then he ends up having like not that great of a year.
So the main thing to point out here before we move to the next team is simply that one of the things that I love about the draft is when you have these guys who produce and are still doubted, and you're all in on them and they hit, right? That's the best feeling in all of fantasy. Harold Fannon, the insanely gigantic final season in college, comes out, was a star for the Browns last year. We know he still has some of that underneath element where he doesn't look always like a star. The trade offers that I've been getting for Fannon in Dynasty right now, Ben, suggest that he could be the tight end 1 next season. It's going to be tough to really compete with Trey McBride unless the wheels fall off there. But Harold Fannin, so much fun. I like that you pointed out him as probably the engine that drives that offense, or at least someone who catches an avalanche of 3-yard passes. If you're playing a tight end premium, those will add up. What about the Washington Commanders here with Jaden Daniels, the move away from Cliff Kingsbury at offensive coordinator, supposedly going to a run-based offense? I mean, this is the dream scenario for Love, right? If he could make it through those early teams that are going to have so much pressure to take him, I mean, this is the spot.
Yeah, this would be a great fit. We know that Jaden Daniels' mobility, I mean, as some of the other mobile QBs get a little bit older, Daniels, if he can stay healthy, is probably going to be the best running quarterback in the NFL over the next several years. He had right around 800 yards along with Lamar. They were like sort of co-league leaders in 2024. I can't remember exactly what it was, but one of them had just over 800, one just under 800, and there was a little bit of a gap behind them, if I remember correctly. Last year, both of them missed time. Lamar continuing to get older, maybe not running quite as much. He's still going to be one of the league's preeminent rushing QBs as well. So was Josh Allen. So are these other guys. But if Daniels can stay healthy, I mean, this is a third-year player who we would expect to use his legs still to some degree, even though they're going to change up the offense. He's not going to be in the shotgun doing the read option stuff and all that as much. I'm sure Washington would like to get him dropping back and throwing more and less reliant on his legs because of some of the injury stuff. And, this is a player that I think can read out the field and throw. But when you have that mobility, well, first of all, when you have the threat of the downfield passing game, they don't have a great receiving core, but you do have Terry McLaurin, whose one big skill set is vertical. He wins down the field and he's efficient down the field. He's going to draw deep coverage. The cover 2 shells are going to tend to roll safety help toward Terry McLaurin more often than not, which is going to open up space around the line of scrimmage, which is why I always loved the Kingsbury offense here, because you were doing, the inside run fakes with the read option stuff, the outside off tackle run potential with Jaden Daniels if he pulls and keeps it, or the quick throws to the perimeter. You kind of have multiple areas of attack at the line of scrimmage, the quick hitters getting the ball out to the wide receivers. That was really difficult for defenses, I think, from a numbers basis pre-snap to account for without bringing safeties down. And then you have the Terry McLaurin element, and you have different ways to win then at all the different areas that you need to. It becomes a numbers game of where the offense has the numbers advantage pre-snap. And Daniels was making those reads really, really well and executing all of that all throughout 2024. They go all the way to the NFC Championship game. Their offense looks incredible. He gets banged up last year. They move on from Kingsbury. Kind of an interesting move here for the Commanders. They want to try to do some different things. I do think that's a little bit odd for what the skill sets are here. And yet Daniel's mobility and Daniel's accuracy downfield, his ability to read, I think the coverages, all are going to still threaten defenses in ways that are going to create space. And if you're a running back tied to that, that's very beneficial. That's going to create opportunities for you to run. We know the mobile QBs benefit running back yards per carry. And then when you're a star, you can benefit even further, right? Like you can add to that. Like Derrick Henry, you mentioned when he got added to Lamar Jackson, his final season in Tennessee, a lot of the peripherals weren't terrible, but everything around him was pretty bad. And so his actual raw numbers, not great rushing the ball. Heads over to Baltimore, suddenly the yards per carry is right back up, and he's breaking long runs again because he's getting into that space because of the threat of Lamar, both as a passer and a runner. Saquon Barkley at the Eagles, we have Jalen Hurts mobility in that, equation, not the only factor, but part of the equation with the Eagles. Obviously the offensive line being so dominant is a major factor. It's all slightly different in all the different spots, but you could see that type of landscape. If Jaden Daniels is as good at quarterback as we think he is, and as threatening to defensive schemes in as many ways as he is, as he was in 2024, clearly, as he is at his peak, you'd love to be the running back alongside that.
You would. One of the issues that the Commanders have, even if Love should get there, is that this is a roster in absolute distress. The Commanders had a catastrophic offseason last year where they pushed all in off of that deep playoff run, thought they were much closer to being the final product than they actually were. You watch this defense play in 2025, and it frequently looked like they were playing with 10 guys on the field. Their secondary was apocalyptically awful. They don't put pressure on. The team needs here, even with how bad the offense is built out at this point, the team needs that lead the way, our edge and corner. And so when you look at mocks, you're talking about guys like Bain and Bailey being mocked to them. You're talking about them being a possibility for the first corner, possibility for the star safety. You have a lot of pressure now on Dan Quinn, who just a year ago, people were raving about this hire and how it had stabilized the franchise and allowed for Jaden Daniels to have this sensational rookie season. A year later, it just looks like they need to completely start over because this defense needs a massive injection of talent. Well, when you also traded your second round pick as part of the package for Laramie Tunsil, another player across the age of 30, you now are looking at this pick and then your next pick being the 71st selection. They can't address running back when they don't have a starting running back on the roster. They can't address that second wide receiver position, which they don't have someone who can really do that effectively. The interesting part about this discussion here is that I start to question our decision to draft Terry McLaurin last week on our worst possible draft. When you look at the overall context, he becomes someone who, if this team doesn't go 2-15, is going to have a good year. They just can't address all of their picks with this 7th overall pick, and then they just don't have a lot of firepower in this draft. Ben, this looks like it's going to be a horrible team in 2026, which I think is such a bummer for Jaden Daniels. But also, there are obviously plenty of scenarios in which he personally can still thrive for fantasy.
Well, the tough part about that for me, about this looks like a horrible team, is I agree with you that the skill positions look that bad. I thought they looked that bad in 2024. I thought they did a poor job addressing it for 2025, but actually probably gave themselves a little bit more upside by bringing in deep, like maybe Debo rebounds from the pneumonia and all that stuff. You and I disagreed to a degree on that possibility. You were pretty out on it. I thought it was maybe at least possible. It clearly did not happen. He's an older player and it wasn't the right way to address it. But when you're putting all your eggs in the McLaurin pushing 30 basket with, Debo and Zach Ertz as your only other options, or your main other option. They're not really doing anything with Ben, Sinat, who we kind of liked, but they're not really doing anything to develop young players. Jalen Lane was an interesting 4th round pick that I was intrigued by, and they did try to get him some routes midseason last year. Didn't really pan out. The big ad this offseason was to bring De'Ami Brown back after he immediately flamed out in Jacksonville. He was decent for the team in 2024, but not as good as you'd expect. He wasn't really worth the Jacksonville contract is sort of the issue. He's not going to fix everything here. They brought in Treylon Burks midseason last year. They've brought in Van Jefferson now. Longtime listeners will know that I'm not a very big Van Jefferson fan. They've been doing this to Jaden Daniels since the beginning of his career. If they could just get him some actual talent around Terry McLaurin, who I do think is a good player, but my argument with him has always been this is not the elite number one from a profile perspective that people treat him as. He's never had the massive targets per route. It's always been a high ADOT. He's a good vertical player and he's efficient, but you're betting on efficiency, and at cost a lot of the time, the efficiency's always, to me, been pretty baked in, and you're taking him in ranges where you need a potential for a first round outcome. Last year I was talking about the different quarters. You're taking him at the really high of the quarter 2 range, and you need a quarter 1 outcome, a first or second round wide receiver outcome to justify a round 4 ADP or what have you. And I don't know that he's ever really had that. He's been a high quarter 2 guy that is a quarter 2 producer. For people who don't remember that specific terminology, I'm basically just saying, he's a round 4 guy that when he hits is he's giving you round 4, round 3 type of production, which is fine, especially in the modern NFL, to just get hits sometimes. But I want to be taking bigger bets when we can. Now, obviously, you mentioned us taking him on the worst possible team maybe wasn't a great fit in hindsight. My big agreement on that would be just because there's a lot of other receivers in that range that are not great picks either. It is a quietly tough range, or maybe loudly tough range, from some of what I've been hearing. Maybe that's very clear to everybody, but not a. He's probably McLaurin, as long as he's healthy and Daniels is healthy, to me is probably a small miss, small hit type of play. And the small miss side of that is pretty relevant, that he's probably going to be pretty good. He's an efficient player. There's not a lot of a threat to him, as you just kind of laid out. But the reason I think they may not be horrible is sort of what I was getting at, is that I don't think the 2024 skill position roster around Daniels was meaningfully better. I mean, and if they add Love, then you're at least adding some real playmaking somewhere. I mean, obviously it's tough again for a running back to be the guy who changes everything. He's more of the cherry on top, as we were talking about. But I think Love certainly, the way he's viewed, when you have Daniels, who's that much of a threat, can be someone who positively impacts enough elements that I don't know. The defense is probably good. The weird thing about getting rid of Kingsbury and keeping Dan Quinn is the defense has been more of the issue. The defense is not very good, and that's probably why they are still going to be bad. But they may need to throw a lot, they may need to run a lot of plays, and they may give Jayden Daniels opportunities to come back and win. Dan Quinn's going to be on the hot seat right away. Like, I don't think this is a team that's just going to go down without a fight. I think they will, in second halves of games, be trying to let Jayden Daniels save them, find wins from down 10 points so that they can go 6-11 or 7-10, or maybe push 8-9 or what have you, instead of going, 3-14. And obviously Dan Quinn gets fired in that scenario. They'll be really interesting. As we were talking about the Browns, I want to go back. We're kind of working through the draft from the middle of the top 10. I want to go back to the number 1 overall pick, the Raiders, who are strongly expected to take Mendoza. Now, you were saying you don't think they don't pick again until, I think it's the 4th pick of the second round. You don't expect there to be a wide receiver that makes a lot of sense there. I mean, this is a team that has done a really poor job at receiver. And it's similar to the Browns to me in that you have this great young tight end. You have an even better tight end in Brock Bowers. The reason I don't love the Browns situation is I actually think with the receivers that they have, there's some decent producers there. And then I think the Browns are in a trickier situation at QB. The Raiders adding Cousins and then also having the first overall pick, Mendoza, the upside for the first overall pick should be meaningfully higher. And when you have both the bridge QB, I don't think Cousins is a great bridge QB at this point. He played all right last year, lower ADOT, throwing underneath a lot. He'd be good for Brock Bowers, if you ask me. But I think when you have both Mendoza and Cousins, you have 2 outs that are probably better than any of the outs on the Browns roster right now, in my opinion, at quarterback. And then the wide receivers are just bad. Like the big addition was Jalen Naylor. It never really made much sense to me. I do think he has some skill, but you look at the production profile. Obviously, he's been playing with great receivers in Minnesota, but still has done less than nothing. Then you have Trey Tucker. They drafted all these guys last year, Jack Besh, Dante Thornton, who were not great picks and then also didn't have good rookie years when they needed it. One of the big weird stats with the Raiders last year is they had so many games, 5 games, where they had under 100 air yards. Geno Smith maybe just forgot how to play quarterback. Also, maybe just didn't ever have anybody open downfield. That's part of the reason probably that he had such a terrible year and was throwing underneath so much and was not able to push the ball vertically. They need receivers. They've put a lot of resources into the wide receiver position, in my opinion, poorly, and really poorly over the last few years. This is one of the worst wide receiver rooms in the entire NFL, if not the single worst, probably the single worst. It doesn't get much worse than this at any given time. Is there on an NFL roster, you have Bowers. Is there you have Genty. Is there a possibility? And the offensive line should be better. Colton Miller missed a lot of last season. They signed Tyler Linderbaum, the center, to a massive contract. You have the potential for some improvement along the line. Is there a possibility that with the 4th pick of the second round, the Raiders are able to address what I think is a massive need at wide receiver? And then you have you have an indoor stadium, you have a better quarterback situation, and you have less wide receiver competition. What you were describing with the Browns as far as a 2026 rookie being the number one, it makes more sense to me for the Raiders roster, or it's similar. Bauer's obviously meaningfully better than Fannin, but I could see where a rookie wide receiver could step into this roster and be pretty darn good pretty quick.
Yeah, and I think there's going to be some temptation to take some flyers with one of those 3 fourth-round picks. When you think about a team that's drafting with the first pick, they're going to select that quarterback. They're talking about the bridge quarterback. They are not in on 2026 as being a competitive season. You need to have patience. In all of those situations, you want to do what you can to move down as opposed to move up. Obviously, they're not going to move out of that top pick, which means your first chance to start to create even a little bit of additional value, which might not even be for this draft, right? I mean, like I said, 3 fourth-round picks, 2 sixth-round picks might be additional value in the next draft, would be with that pick at 36. But I do think that puts the quarterback and the head coach in a little bit of a bad situation, to where I do think I would be tempted to burn a part of that 4th-round value if it ended up being that you had to move back from the 4th to the 6th with one of those 3 picks, and you could move up a couple spots. We don't know what it's going to demand. And one of the things is to get from 36 into the range where you can get into the end of that wide receiver tier. Other teams are going to understand where that tier break is,
right,
and are not going to want to just give it to you. You might have to overpay to do that, and that's the part that I think is tricky. But I don't think that you want to go back to this well that they drank out of last year, where Besh and Thornton, you're saying, like, these are our guys. Like, Besh is a guy who can be that possession receiver. Thornton is this freak athlete. The problem is that that's not the way it works at the NFL level. You simply have to be good enough in order to help your offense. It's not impossible that one of those 2 guys takes a little bit of a step in year 2 with a better offensive coordinator. But everything about what Kubiak and the Seahawks did last season was predicated on Jackson Smith and Jigba. It's easy to talk about, we had this great defense and we ran the ball a ton and we had 2 great running backs. None of that would have mattered at all without JSN. And JSN was such a unicorn from the perspective of how he allowed teams to attack, how he allowed the Seahawks to attack versus everyone else in the NFL. You're not going to simply be able to replicate those things by using the overall template if you don't have the guy. Now, maybe Brock Bowers is simply that good. I've been doing some work on Kenyon Sadiq, Eli Stowers, those guys, and contrasting them with Warren and Loveland from last season, contrasting them with these historical tight ends. And it doesn't really matter what you do. When you go back and you look at Brock Bowers, you're like, Brock Bowers probably should have been the first pick in the draft when he came out. And if you can get him somehow in a Trey McBride swap, and I mean, anytime that you can add Brock Bowers to your roster at this point, that should be the number one priority that you have. Brock Bowers is about to go on one of the most epic runs that we've ever seen. So maybe it can actually just be Brock Bowers. But I would like to see them, if they have a player who is their guy, and again, we know it's risky to get into that mindset, but if they have someone that they like who's projected in that 25 to 30 range, and he does actually get to that point, and you need to pay up to get there, I just don't like burning the first year of Mendoza's career if there was something you could do about it. And I don't mean burning it by being competitive. I mean burning it from a developmental perspective. I mean, think about where we are with Cam Ward, who just, deserved so much more as a rookie.
Totally agree. And I think teams feel that way. You can hear the narrative, like during the draft. We've heard it so often. Oh, they got that rookie to pair with their first pick. So many teams have done that in the past. I'm maybe blanking on great examples that immediately come to mind, but I know that we've had that sort of narrative and that sort of discussion that when you draft one of these young QBs, you want to be able to give them a young receiver at the same time. So
we think about Burrow with Higgins and then coming back with Jamar Chase on top of that. And suddenly now you have this triplet situation where, they don't have spring training. That's the baseball version. They don't practice before the season starts. They don't play in the first month, but then after the first month of the season, the Bengals were like the best team in the NFL. And that's the direction you want to get in here if you are rebuilding your franchise.
Caleb Williams, Roma Dunze, obviously Cam Ward. They tried to address with multiple more like day 3 types, but they tried to get multiple rookie receivers in to help him. I'm trying to look at some of the recent QBs, but yeah, Dunze was the one that was slipping my mind where they took up in the back of the top 10. They made another wide receiver pick. It would be fascinating to see if the Raiders did that. So if Love for some reason doesn't go to Washington, you mentioned the Saints. I assume probably not totally thinking about ETN still in there. Obviously, we're still getting familiar with the free agent landing spots. I would think that they would probably not add him after they just added ETN. And then the Chiefs are right behind that. And they obviously have just added Kenneth Walker. So it's kind of interesting to see or to think about like where he would maybe go if he hadn't gone by then. I don't know. It seems like Washington, if he makes it to Washington, Washington's very likely to take him. Again, the Titans he's being mocked to the Titans a lot at 4. And so it'll be interesting to see where Love lands.
I've read that the Chiefs are not necessarily out, even having signed Walker. You think about Walker and how much the Seahawks used Charbonnet last season. I just don't think there's any chance of those things coming to fruition. Even good teams have a lot of needs, right? The Chiefs have 2 first-round picks. They have Patrick Mahomes. They don't make it to the Super Bowl for the first time in basically ever. The Chiefs have a ton of needs. You can't take running backs when you can address other positions. And I think that we get in this mindset of Love is this extraordinary talent. And yet when you go back and look through the last decade, there are extraordinary running back talents with pretty good regularity. To think that Love would have to be the pick at any of these spots or all of these spots throughout does a bit of a disservice to the rest of the top 10. I mean, there are good players at positions that are much more important. Who do you like?
What's the next? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think probably either a wide receiver or a non-offensive player. They're one of these teams that I do think is a lot of pieces away. But I don't. Yeah, I guess I'm not as familiar as I should be with the Saints, entire roster. Saints fans very, very opinionated out there.
You seem reluctant to.
I'm reluctant to opine on them. They will 50 of them will swarm into your mentions and say the same exact thing because they've all been listening to the same like one analyst and none of them thinks freely for themselves. No, I'm just kidding. Saints fans, I love you. Zach Wilson and Elijah Moore was another pairing. The Jets did that very effectively. The top of the first round and the top of the second round, quarterback wide receiver tandem. Another one that I saw a minute ago was CJ Stroud. They came back with Tank Dell in the third round, which was a fun one in that rookie season. A lot of teams that draft an early quarterback, they like to get a day 2 receiver, if not, another first round pick if they can get into one. So that would be a fun one for Mendoza. I don't know. What do you think about the Saints? I definitely think a second wide receiver here would be effective. They've acquired obviously now Devon Vele. They brought in Jalen Polk this offseason. I don't think there's like a lot of hope there necessarily. They definitely need some secondary wide receiver production behind Chris Olave. You don't have Rashid Shaheed anymore, and it was barren even before you traded Shaheed as far as wide receiver depth in this, on this roster. Juwan Johnson had that impressive breakout last year. Ran a lot of routes. We have some of these offenses where tight ends are not consolidating routes. Juwan Johnson's a guy that I think, is definitely interesting for the fantasy landscape for 2026.
Yeah, you mentioned Juwan Johnson. I think on that Commanders team, maybe the guy who is the most interesting in terms of actually being able to shift some of your teams for not that much would be Chiga Okonkwo. 3 consecutive seasons with 70 plus targets. You look at him from an athletic perspective, people are saying he can, run in the 4.5s in the 40. I don't know that we want to look at him as the most athletic tight end in the NFL, but someone who can be that move type of tight end. If there's so little competition for targets there with the Commanders, one of the reasons I've pushed back at times against Juwan Johnson is just simply not wanting to spend ammunition on these lower end tight ends, especially guys who have been in the NFL for a while and probably just don't move the needle. But I think both of those guys actually are compelling picks this year. And Johnson obviously proved it last season. We deployed him at a variety of stretches where it really did help. The Saints
it's just crazy. I completely agree with you on Johnson in terms of not necessarily moving the needle a ton. It's just crazy to me in early underdog drafts, he's still going tight end 19, which when I did my field tipper series, whenever it was, February, I think it went into March a little bit. I thought it was bizarre. I thought that had to correct. It hasn't really. He's going at ADP 155. The thing that they showed you last year is they're willing to concentrate the routes at that position. And then also they got a lot of passes off. They ran a lot of plays. Like we know Kellen Moore wants to play up tempo. People are high on Shuck. I'm not even high on Shuck, but of all the tight ends in the league last year, Juwan Johnson was third in the NFL in receiving yardage. He only had 3 touchdowns. He was one of, it looks like 7 or 8 maybe that had 100 targets, caught 77 balls, 889 yards though, like a big yardage number. He's more of a, potentially more of a vertical tight end than some of these other guys, is going to run some more routes down the field. Coming like to finish, again, third in receiving yardage at the position last year. A big part of that was routes. I understand that. And I agree with you about the lack of ceiling, but routes matter at this position. Being able to go out and actually run a lot of routes matters. I think he's going to run a lot of routes again next year. I don't think he's only going to catch 3 touchdowns if he catches 100 plus targets, or if he gets 100 plus targets again. Like that's a very, very low touchdown rate. That is why he finished in half PPR points per game. He was tight end 15. This is why he's going tight end 19. But I don't understand why he would be going even lower than that. Anyway, I mean, there's a lot of routes here. There's a lot of raw volume here. And if you're doing best ball drafts right now, I mean, Juwan Johnson at ADP 155 is absurd. With the Kellen Moore like volume addition, like the concentration of routes that we saw and potential for pace boosts. It doesn't make any sense.
So in year 2 here with Kellen Moore, I think the interesting question is, will he be one of these guys who is saying, okay, I am an offensive genius. I can work with lesser pieces. I can get the job done through scheme, through play calling. Or is he going to look at it a little bit more from the perspective that we have seen from Sean McVay, where Sean McVay is also like, obviously I'm a genius. I'm probably the best coach in the NFL. But if I can get that secondary piece, if I can get a Devontae Adams, and we know that they've played around with adding additional pieces for this year because they weren't even happy with how well Devontae Adams played a year ago, mostly a goal line wide receiver. They want to have the ability to stress teams even more, right? They're saying we can, with Matthew Stafford, if we had the pieces, you're not going to stop us. And we'll be pretty unique that way, right? And the Rams last year emerged as one of, if not the only team that the elite defenses couldn't stop. When you think about the Seahawks and them winning the Super Bowl, there were some pretty fluky things that happened on their path that allowed them to be that team, as opposed to the Rams. If those fluky plays go in a different direction, we're talking about how the Rams template worked out. I think that determines whether or not this is an edge rusher or a wide receiver. It's a virtual lock that you're either taking the most important position on defense and you're trying to elevate a portion of your team. I mean, the Saints were bad just across the board last year. You think about the run that they had, that was great coaching, but it was also just an incredibly soft schedule because you were play in the NFC South. If you want to be a team that not only wins the NFC South, but is competitive against teams from all of the other divisions, you don't need to get a little bit better. You've got to get a lot better. Do you want to start with the defense or do you want to take the receiver? I think the receivers here are pretty interesting, especially if Moore has a guy that he likes to pair with Chris Olave. If you have 2 players who are non-stars, but well above average starters, there's going to be a lot that a coordinator can do with a Chris Olave, and whether that's Tate or Lemon, Jordan Tyson. But the combination of those talents, if you get, I mean, the problem still comes back to Tyler Shough has a lot to still prove. But if he ends up being what he looked like down the stretch last year, this, statuesque, and I say that in a good way, QB with a big arm who's willing to attack, you put those two receivers out there and suddenly this offense can be pretty interesting.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, to be clear, when I was going off about Juwan Johnson, a big part of it is that I do think there's an opening here, and it would make a lot of sense, as you were saying, to address that with a wide receiver in the first round. I mean, I think that's the clear fit for them at the back end of the top 10. Looking like a little bit later in the first round, who are some other teams that, I mean, again, I should have done more prep work on this show, but the Falcons to me are a clear one. They lose Darnell Mooney, not that even really matters, but have routes available. They brought in Jahan Dotson, Olamide Zaccheaus. I mean, we're not talking about guys that are going to stop them from it's very similar to what you just described with the Saints. You have a number one in Drake London, you have a tight end with Pitts, but you have this opportunity for a first-round receiver to step in and be the guy alongside that whole new offense and offensive scheme there, potential for a little bit more two tight end stuff with Kevin Stefanski. Still, I mean, plenty of room for a second receiver there in my mind. Are there other spots that you're looking at as really strong wide receiver landing spots in the middle of the first round?
Well, the Chiefs are often mocked with a receiver. I guess, I mean, it's interesting. The Chiefs, because they let their corners go and because pass rush is sort of what they need anyway, you have this team where the defense has actually been their strength for the past couple of years. And yet, because you have that investment in Walker, because you have the potential for development from Rice and Worthy, because you have the re-signing of Travis Kelce, it looks like these picks that the Chiefs have accumulated will be deployed back in the direction of defense again, perhaps to address what we discussed kind of at the end of the season, where their defense stops you, but it's not a playmaking defense. And those defenses that we saw carry their teams deep into the playoffs, terrify opposing squads. I mean, you can't just stop the opponent at this point. You have to do all the work, which is what we saw from the Seattle Seahawks. But you asked about the receiver. Obviously, people concerned about Rice's off the field and the fact that he's sort of a forced volume guy who then, when he gets those underneath targets, his run after the catch has been fantastic. Worthy, many people seeing as a bust. Obviously, Jalen Royals didn't do anything last year. Ben, for me, we talked so much about what the Rams were able to do successfully. I think with the Chiefs, it has to be that second first-round pick, if any of the receivers get to you, where it would be a receiver. If you're going to take the plunge on offense at the 9th pick here, I guess my thought would simply be that if you're the Kansas City Chiefs, you're on the clock with the 9th pick, and you have Travis Kelce, who needs to leave the team, but potentially could be a bridge tight end to the next star, and or you could do some interesting two tight end things next year. If you have, so the only two players who are remotely comparable to Kenyon Sadiq athletically are Calvin Johnson and Vernon Davis. You have to be very convinced that Sadiq can't play football to pass on him right here. And that may very well be the case, right? But that needs to be your take. It can't be like, oh, we think other positions would make more sense. If you're going to pass on Sadiq, it has to be that you don't think he's a good football player.
Well, there you go. You have your flag planted for the Chiefs first round pick. I love hearing
I don't know that he's the best tight end. I'm saying, but if you're the Chiefs and you have this spot here, we know the Chiefs have wanted to be extremely athletic. Some of the times with someone like Rashee Rice, it's gotten them a sleeper. Some of the times with Xavier Worthy, it appears to have gotten them a bust. Their receiving core has been incredibly athletic over the last 4 or 5 years, but the only person who actually made a difference there was Tyreek Hill, who could also play, right? So, I mean, you could argue the Chiefs have overemphasized athleticism. It'll be interesting to see when you have this athletic freak that is so far beyond even all the rest of their moves, what they decide to do with this pick. I think that's also the case with a number of these guys. Sadiq is a tricky player to evaluate, but where he's projected in relationship to the actual like receivers is a bit weird when you think about where the floor ceiling situation is for those guys. I mean, you're going to pass on Calvin Johnson for like okay wide receivers. But again, I mean, he very well may not be Calvin Johnson. We know the Bengals are going to address their defense. We know the Miami Dolphins
that's the
should
spot.
Take like 15 picks. Like, can we address 15 spots with our first pick?
But that's the spot where if we get a wide receiver landing somewhere in the first round, if it's to the Dolphins, I'm not particularly thrilled about Bobby Slowick taking over that offense. I'm particularly not thrilled about Malik Willis in terms of pass volume. Quinn Ewers as your backup. I was glad to see Waddle get out of there. There's not a lot of upside to this passing game. I can't really see myself drafting a lot of Dolphins receivers in any format this year. I just don't really see it playing out that favorably. I mean, maybe late round stuff if you're doing some best ball and you've taken Willis, you want some stack type, options, but they do have a need at wide receiver. I mean, pretty clearly. They brought in Jalen Tolbert, who's not good. They don't have Jalen Waddle anymore. Tyreek Hill is gone as well as a free agent. You're looking at Tolbert. Tutu Atwell is, the other guy they bring in. Malik Washington, Taj Washington. This is their wide receiver room. Like, none of these guys are viable starters. I mean, they're rotational players at best. So there's a strong possibility that the Dolphins take one of these wide receivers. You talked about kind of a tier of wide receivers or all similar wide receivers. One of them may go in the top 10, but probably not all of them are going to be gone by the time the Dolphins are up. And whoever the Dolphins select, if they do go wide receiver at 11, I'm going to immediately be upset for that player. This is the stuff.
Tough. I mean, you have a you have a team with those receivers that you mentioned, and yet, I mean, wide receiver is not even necessarily at the top of their list of needs. They have the 11th pick, the 30th pick, the 43rd pick. They have 4 third-round picks. So they're going to be selecting a lot, and you can do some damage if you hit on the right guys. This is a team with $179 million in dead money. I don't know.
Is that bad?
It's worse and is labeled as burdened, which, yes, I do think that is a bit of an issue. Then hopefully this team just makes some good selections, right? I mean, they're so many years away, but they have a lot of good picks. Hopefully they select some good guys. The receiver they select maybe at 30. I mean, they've got to hope that the receiver gets to them, though, at 30. Because you're seeing all of these guys mocked in the first, 26, 27 picks. I mean, you got to pick somebody else at 11, right? You've got to pick a star at 11 and then pick the receiver at 30. They might not get there. And then, I mean, you're going to run the ball every time with like a 199-pound running back because, I mean, Jalen Wright and Ollie Gordon can't play. So it's got to be Achane just the whole way through.
But he's apparently still on the trade block. We may see Achane get moved. I mean, who knows? You said $179 million in dead money. I love on this NFL.com graphic, 127 in active cap spending, which is also dead last. But I mean, that's meaningfully less, $50 million less than the dead money. And then what does that leave them in cap space? Like, oh yeah, they still have plenty of cap space to where that they can get to the point where, they have more active cap spending than dead money. No. That leaves them 1.9 million in cap space. They have the number 31 amount of cap space. They're going to spend way less money than they have in dead money this year. I didn't really realize that that's how it all adds up. It makes sense, obviously, but when you have the Tua contract and all of those things. But yeah, a ton of dead money for Miami. This is a transition year. It's a find out what you have with Malik Willis year. I guess we'll see what they do with the wide receiver position because, I mean, currently wide open depth chart. But I will also, even if somebody lands there, I mean, I'm sure some people who, like to do that thing where it's like, well, there's available targets and that player will obviously be the number one. And, what does that mean? Is wondering why I would be so down on it. I just don't see the pass volume and pass efficiency upside. Malik Willis has been a very efficient passer so far in his career in much better situations and in very run-based offenses where he's never really thrown for any kind of volume. They're going to trail. He's going to throw more than he has in the past. It's still going to be well below average because of his play style. This is what we see with mobile quarterbacks. Malik Willis, I believe the number is, has never thrown more than 26 passes in a game in his career so far. It's a leap of faith to make him a starting quarterback at this point. He only has 6 career starts. He's played really well in those games where he's started and thrown, in the low 20s. His efficiency per attempt has been phenomenal, which is great. But when you're asked to throw more on third downs and drop back and read out defenses against obvious pass defenses, as opposed to being in a multifaceted, very run first offense and then throwing off of that play action, always throwing in non-obvious spots, it's a very different thing in terms of what it's going to mean for your efficiency and also throwing to meaningfully worse players. I mean, in Green Bay, he had maybe not the greatest wide receivers in the world, but when you're doing the play action vertical passing, the reason his efficiency was so high is he's throwing to really good vertical receivers. He's throwing to Christian Watson, who's making plays down the field. And then, your yards per attempt are very high and those types of things. And that's what we've seen with Willis's stats to this point that are very small sample. I like Malik Willis. I'm very interested in the Malik Willis experiment this year. I do think people who expect him to be a very efficient passer with these wide receivers and in a situation where he's going to have to be asked to do different things at the quarterback position are probably not setting expectations for Malik Willis in the right spot. I want you to set them in a reasonable spot so he can exceed them if he plays well. And that reasonable spot would be, look, this is a bad offense, bad offensive coordinator, bad players around him. It's going to be tricky for him. If he's better than one of the very worst quarterbacks in the league this year statistically, then that means it's a success in my mind. I mean, that means that he has overcome what may be the worst situation for any quarterback in the league. And that makes it tough for a number one wide receiver as well, even if they step into a ton of targets and a ton of volume and a ton of opportunity. Sean, I just mentioned the Packers. They traded Dontavian Wicks. They let Romeo Doubs go. A lot of people looking at it like, hey, this is nice. We're going to finally get some clarity on who's going to run routes potentially. We have Christian Watson, we have Jaden Reed, we have Matthew Golden, and beyond them, not as much depth now. You have Savion Williams, you have Bo Melton, some of those guys that were like the wide receiver 7 in past years, a little further down the list. They brought in Sky Moore, mostly probably for special teams. He's done well as a returner since not really being a hit as a wide receiver. But are they a low-key possibility to add to wide receiver again now that they've cleared that out? That's one team I was looking at as I was clicking through. No, you say absolutely not.
It's got to be those 3 guys, right? The problem is that 2 of them can't stay healthy. 2 really exciting players. And Christian Watson still has the potential to jump to stardom. Jaden Reed, the underneath, but also playmaking receiver, the jump to stardom. Matthew Golden, maybe the highest ceiling of the 3, but didn't do anything last year. But then when your whole offense is going to be handing the ball off and then taking shots off of it, do we need more than the 3 guys? Because you're also hoping that Tucker Kraft comes back and picks up where he left off, even if there's some hope in that one as well.
The other name the other team I was gonna throw out, because a lot of the teams in the middle of the draft, I mean, they do have some receiver depth already. The Panthers are a team you could throw out there. I don't really want a receiver to land at the Panthers, similar, but not quite as much of an issue as the Dolphins situation. But it does seem like they're going to be pretty run based with Bryce Young at QB. But the Bills, again, picking at the end of the first round, they don't have a second round pick because of that DJ Moore trade, but they're picking at 26. Could again be looking at a pass catcher. They obviously did Dalton Kincaid a few years back. They did Keon Coleman. They traded for DJ Moore. Maybe they think DJ Moore, Khalil Shakir, and like Josh Palmer is enough right now. Keon Coleman is enough. But it does still seem like a need for them. They have other needs as well. But toward the end of the first round, if somebody slides a little bit, whether that's, maybe it's Concepcion, who I know has been mocked into the first round now a decent amount. I could see them as a landing spot for a receiver potentially. The Jets picking 2 need a second receiver, but seem like very likely to go defense early. You could make the case the Cardinals, obviously Michael Wilson looked really good and has Harrison. They're picking 3. They don't look likely to take a receiver at 3. Am I missing some teams here that make a lot of sense for a receiver? A lot of these teams in the middle of the first round, I feel like have wide receiver in an okay spot.
Well, when you look at the Ravens, who had their fall off year last year and are a little bit of a situation like the Chiefs, where maybe this is the earliest that they're going to draft for a while, you have to, every year you make good picks. And one of the reasons the Ravens are good every season is that they're organizationally, they have applied the right strategy in the draft and they've drafted well. They've built the roster well. They're in an interesting position where you have the star QB, you still have Derrick Henry, you have Zay Flowers, who in a new setup here and yet another year older. Zay Flowers seems like one of those guys who could make the leap, sort of a Jaden Reed type of player, but without the injuries and with a lot more insulation around his target role. You have the kind of weird decision to re-sign Mark Andrews to a 3-year contract. And unlike the situation with Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews is obviously a lot younger than Travis Kelce, but also this is a real contract. And so the question there is, does that signal more that Jesse Minter, as he kind of reestablishes the Ravens again as this just dominant defensive force, is this a lock defensive pick, or when the Rashad Bateman experiment has basically failed and you want to have that balance? We know that one of the things that happened last year is that the Ravens offense, as surprising as it is, when you have a Lamar Jackson, it was one of the ones that seemed to be figured out. And that's one of the reasons that the front office went in a different direction. Part of moving that back the other way could be getting a second receiver to pair with Bateman. It's also possible, I think, that you would go with a tight end here and do some of the 2 tight end things. You have Isaiah likely leave, but that Mark Andrews contract probably makes it tricky in a way that I don't think that the Chiefs situation necessarily does. Can you see them going offense here, or is Jesse Minter going to really establish this defense right off the bat, not just in terms of how they practice, how they scheme, but with this pick as a signature pick?
What you're describing seems like the total fit. At the same time, Minter also hired Declan Doyle. I think he's the youngest offensive coordinator, one of the very youngest. Potentially feels like he wants to do the same thing for his young offensive coordinator that you just described, right? Give him the firepower and the weapons that he needs to succeed. Maybe he thinks he can handle some of the stuff on the defensive side with the personnel they have. That was one that I was looking at in terms of being a fit for a receiver. I guess I was thinking it wasn't necessarily a good fit from a fantasy perspective. I was trying to find spots that I would be pumped for the player to land. We've seen a lot of receivers come and go with the Ravens and always seem to, in part because of Lamar's mobility and athleticism, in part because of their ability to run the ball. They have Derrick Henry still. Maybe it'll be a little different with a different regime. But I'm thinking about Tamarquise Brown and his tenure, and then obviously now Zay Flowers' tenure as a number one. To me, Zay Flowers is a lot better of a player than the statistics he's been able to put up. Mark Andrews has had some decent years and then has fallen off. Rashad Bateman, I think, is actually probably a better player than the numbers he's been able to put up, right? And so it's just always seems to be a situation with the Ravens where they don't, just because of the way they play and because of the lower rate of dropbacks that turn into pass attempts when you have a guy like Lamar Jackson, because of the way he plays, which isn't a knock on him, but it is a knock on the fantasy viability of the pass catchers that are playing for him. or at least the consistency, the target volume, some of those elements, it does always seem to be a little bit of an underwhelming spot. Just to like put some other thoughts to what I was saying, the Cowboys pick at both 12 and 20, assuming they do get Pickens there back. I mean, they tagged him, right? The plan is to have him. They obviously have the 2 stars. The Rams are at 13. You have some talk that they may try to move Adams, but it seems like that, or to me, it seemed like that was related to trying to trade for AJ Brown. Maybe the Rams are in the market for a wide receiver if Adams is gone, but you still have Puka Nacua. It's not like a great spot for a rookie to step into. Ravens at 14, as you mentioned. Bucks at 15. Yes, they lose Mike Evans, but they're still paying Chris Godwin a ton of money. They have to expect that he's going to be able to come back a little bit healthier. And they took a first-round pick last year in Ibuka. The Jets I was missing.
The other thing I wanted to ask you about there is that Jalen McMillan has played well.
Yeah.
Now, he hasn't necessarily been a huge target hog, but you have plus efficiency. You have him as a guy who probably was a very savvy pick there and was able to recover from a pretty serious injury. I have seen commentary suggesting that even though they're deep at receiver, that they don't have anybody who can do what Mike Evans can do. So you have to draft, or that wide receiver would be in the mix. Not that you have to draft a receiver, but it'd be in the mix. I guess if you have 3 good receivers, I think you have to be able to build your offense around that, especially if you have multiple receiving backs. I mean, receivers, the receivers you draft aren't going to be able to do what Mike Evans did for you over the last decade. That can't really be your standard.
Right. And the way I was thinking about it is you can't give out the resources to the position they did last offseason and then come back and use your first round pick the next year on the position as well. Because they gave Godwin the huge contract last year, a lot of guaranteed money, and use the first round pick with Ibuka. If you come back and use your first round pick again this year, where else on your roster are you going to have holes now? Because you have not used enough resources at other positions. I mean, you just don't see NFL teams do that year over year. So that's why I didn't mention McMillan, but I agree with you. You have to think, okay, we have a cheap day 2 other rookie contract player that's here that's good enough. Like if we're thinking we need a third guy behind Godwin and Ibuka, who we put a lot of resources into, we gotta do that from within with McMillan, as you just described, as opposed to using the 15th pick on the position. But 16, the Jets, I was gonna say I missed that the Jets have that second pick at 16. That feels like that could be a wide receiver to pair with Garrett Wilson, with Geno Smith there, probably slinging it a little bit more this year than their quarterbacks last year. I do think that could wind up being, and they have Adonai Mitchell, who earns targets, not typically an efficient player, but they don't even have very many wide receivers on the roster right now. Have let some guys go in free agency. This seems like a spot that I think is actually probably a low-key decent one, because they're going to be throwing plenty probably. And I think Garrett Wilson is going to command enough attention. Garrett Wilson might just get all the targets. We talked about the fit with him and Geno being kind of a one-read player. But working off of that seems like a decent spot to come into for a rookie. Behind that, you have the Lions at 17. Don't really feel like that's a huge need. The Vikings at 18, definitely not a need. I mentioned the Panthers. The Cowboys again at 20, as I said. At 21, you have the Steelers, who have added Metcalf and Pittman in the last 2 off seasons. And so you're probably not thinking, they have to add another receiver at 21. 22 is the Chargers. Again, so much depth at that position for the Chargers. 23, the Eagles, potentially, if A.J. Brown's definitely gone, to pair with Devonta Smith. 24, the Browns. We talked about them at potentially 6. 25, the Bears, even without DJ Moore, they have weapons in the passing game. Adunze, Burden, Loveland, guys that they've spent a lot of capital on in recent years. A lot of those teams have spent capital at the position or have multiple legit NFL players through the middle of the first round. It doesn't feel like there's great landing spots. Now, teams are always looking to add another receiver. Like the Bucs last year took Ibuka when they had both Evans and Godwin. That can definitely happen in these ranges. I was just kind of looking at it from the perspective of not seeing a bunch of spots that jump out to me up until the Bills at 26. Certainly still feels like one. But then you have the Niners behind that at 27. They added Evans, right? They have Pearsall. They still have Kittle presumably coming back. They could potentially still add another, but that's a team that added a big free agent wide receiver this year. You have the Texans behind that. They're hoping to get Tank Dell back this year. Still have Nico Collins, took 2 receivers last year, and then your Chiefs come back up at 29. It'll be interesting. I mean, some of those teams can take a receiver, but they have other needs. Like, teams always have needs to use in the first round. So it'll be interesting to see if somebody maybe slides a little bit at receiver through some of those ranges. All it takes is 1 or 2 teams that we think are wide receiver needy to not actually prioritize the wide receiver as the pick they have to make in that spot. And some of those other teams that I mentioned feeling like wide receiver is too much of a luxury for where they're at in their roster building. They have enough other alternatives. But again, you can never really have too many wide receivers. It'll just be interesting, I think.
Yeah, as you work out that 20 through 32 range where I expect so many of these guys to go, you certainly have the Steelers as a possibility, the Eagles, as you mentioned, with the A.J. Brown trade, the Browns, the Bills, the 49ers receiver room is in a bit of, I don't want to say disarray, but you're having some turnover there. It would be interesting to know how teams like the Jets are gaming this out and who they think is actually going to be there. You would hope that they have a variety of models that are projecting that for them. I think the 16th pick, though, as you mentioned, is the one to use at receiver. We know that the Jets need a lot of things, but when you think about coming back on defense, they have the 33rd pick and the 44th pick. Because they have those selections, and it's going to depend a little bit on how their tiers fall out on defense as well, but you're not forced as much to make a difficult choice there, especially if you have a lot of different needs on defense that you can address. Whereas the receiver one is pretty straightforward, that would be something that might elevate. And again, it's going to depend on their evaluation of Mitchell, because if they think that they've already really hit there, it's going to be different. But I think the Jets have the flexibility to make this play because they got to address whatever they see as the big move with the second pick. They have those 2 second-round picks. Then they have 3 2027 first-round picks, so they will be able to continue to build there. One of the things that's kind of interesting with Geno Smith bouncing from team to team is that basically no one feels they can build around him for the long term, or once they have him, they decide quickly that they can't. We talked about getting that quarterback and then trying to build around them with the pieces. The Jets are now more or less in the situation that the Raiders were in last year, where they're trying to build their organization, but they don't have the QB in play. It'll be interesting to see if they're one of these teams that has some belief in Ty Simpson, because obviously those second-round picks that we just discussed would be in the range where you could potentially take him. But if you do that, then you're not going to get that production for this season. What about the Carolina Panthers there at 19? We know that it's frustrating just to have McMillan stuck here in this uninspiring offense with Bryce Love. But I mean, you talked about how the Bucs can't afford to continue to throw picks into it. The Panthers have been throwing picks at this receiver position over and over and over. And after the Mingo and Leggett misses, they finally have a star, but they're obviously not done. They have some young guys at tight end that we like. Jatavian Sanders, somebody who could potentially still be a viable starter. But I would think that Sadiq would also be in play here. One of the interesting things about his projection, I talked about him generally being mocked lower than I would expect after what happened at the combine, and also for someone who's going to be a 21-year-old rookie, is that once you get out of this, the 10 through 20 range is not necessarily great fit-wise for him to come off the board. It's possible someone will get a sensational value on a player who, at least from an athletic perspective, is one of a kind.
Yeah, NFL.com has Sadiq as the most likely pick. It looks like they're using Grinding the Mocks for their data out of 1,800 mock drafts from Grinding the Mocks. 27% of them have Sadiq. No one else over 6% at this pick. So a lot of people slotting Sadiq in here. But as you suggested earlier, Sadiq maybe should go, and just suggested now, maybe should go higher. And you'd love to see the Chiefs take him. If he's off the board, then that seems to indicate there's not a consensus as to what the Panthers would do at that point. the next several names are different linemen. There's 3 offensive linemen, 2 defensive linemen among the next 6 names, 5 different linemen. But I certainly agree with you. I could see a wide receiver pick, and I definitely see wide receiver as a need for these guys. Even though I think Jalen Coker is a legit, NFL player, when you have Xavier Legette as basically your only other dude right now, they were using Jimmy Horn a decent amount last year. It didn't really seem like he was a huge contributor. They brought in John Mechie, who's kicked around a couple spots. Probably they'll still use Legette in those 3 receiver sets. He's big. He's fast. He's a guy who can draw some coverage just because of his athleticism, probably. Although, I mean, I wouldn't really put a lot of attention onto him if I was a defense because he doesn't actually flash the efficiency. I'd spend a lot more time trying to stop Tetairoa McMillan and Jalen Coker. But yeah, I mean, I think if Coker is your number 3, you're in good shape. That's a much better wide receiver room, and Legette's sort of your rotational 4. Hey, if there's an injury, we can play Xavier Legette in a couple different spots or rotate Coker around to make things work or what have you. Then you probably have a little bit of a better wide receiver room in terms of, getting through a 17-game season than what they currently are looking at. So I do agree with you. Like, it is a need for sure. I just wonder if that's the direction they'll go. And I don't love it as a fit for the rookie, in question. I guess I kind of hope that they do follow what these mock drafts are saying. Even if Sadiq is gone, Sadiq would be a fun one for sure, as you mentioned. But go with a pick in the trenches on either the offensive or defensive line, if that makes some sense for their roster right now. Seems like a better outcome for the fantasy football prospects of everyone here, as well as just sort of because I don't want anything else to step on Tetairoa McMillan either, right? Like, I already think there's not enough volume. If you add another good receiver, it's good for the Panthers. I don't think Bryce Young is going to be a good long-term quarterback. It's sort of where I'm at. I mean, I think he's somewhat viable, but they also added Kenny Pickett, who I definitely don't think is a good long-term quarterback. There was a moment in time where I wasn't sure that he was bad after his rookie season, and we took some Kenny Pickett at times. Sean, Kenny Pickett is bad. We have some confirmation there. He's now their backup. It's not even a situation where, like, I can feel good about the backup being potentially fantasy friendly. I think this is a roster that's not going to be very good at the quarterback position. And Dave Canales just showed us last year that he's going to mitigate that with a run heavier game plan than you might actually want. Based on like modeling it or what have you with the different game situations. He's going to try to win through a lower scoring game, through the reality that the defenses are ahead of offenses right now a little bit. Even though their defense isn't amazing, they'll be able to get some stops. They'll be able to do some different things. They do have a good defensive coordinator, Ejiro Evero. And I think it's a tough spot for a wide receiver to land into. So anyway, that's probably the disappointment kind of in my voice, or as we talk about the Panthers, I'm just sort of hoping that doesn't happen.
Yes, that roster currently as constructed is probably the best for his outlook. Ben, the Steelers are an interesting team there with the 22nd pick. If you look at their roster, like, this team is maybe as well built as almost any team in the NFL. The problem simply being that they don't have a QB and there's just no viable path to getting one. And if you are obviously not going to use that pick at quarterback, and I say obviously, you never know what a team might do. I mean, this is a team that has DK Metcalf and Michael Pittman at receiver. They've got redundancy at running back, probably not a high-end starter, but multiple capable starters. You have a couple interesting guys in Darnell Washington and Pat Freiermuth at tight end. This pick is going to be offensive line, or even with a loaded defense, just make the defense better. It has to be just the best player available selection for the Steelers. You could say that maybe it would help to add yet another receiver beyond those established vets. I don't know that best player available is necessarily going to be that for them. Any chance that the Bears go ahead and make another offensive pick? We know that a year ago they had Adunze, DJ Moore, you have Cole Kmet. They went ahead and picked both Luther Burden and Colston Loveland. Both of those selections look like hits, even though the payoff was late in the season. We know that you can make your picks look good when you are the play caller by emphasizing the guys that are sort of your guys. DJ Moore gone. Adunze has looked like a low-end starter, maybe at best. You don't really have a pick here that you can do anything to move the needle at running back. They had a sort of gambling playmaking defense that gave up yards but created big plays. I mean, the clear-cut pick here would be a defensive selection. But is Ben Johnson going to load up to the point that he did in Detroit and just simply say, even if Caleb Williams makes some strange decisions, we're going to score every possession? Because in today's NFL, that would be certainly a difference-making type of, I say, approach to football. But if you're scoring frequently like the Rams did a year ago, that's one of the reasons why I think, I mean, obviously you had that game, Bears-Rams. I think the Bears are farther ahead than people think. I love them for next season. We talked a bit about how their Super Bowl odds are surprisingly low. I'm really intrigued by what Ben Johnson may do here.
Yeah, I think that's I can follow that line of thinking. They brought in Khalif Raymond to be sort of the wide receiver 3 now. They got the 2 tight ends. They're going to do some multi-tight end stuff. I really just want to see them add a running back. They seem to be headed toward potentially Swift and Monangai again. Haven't added anyone in free agency. It's not really a class where if, Love's not going to be there at 25, seems like if they add a rookie like on day 2, I mean, I'm going to be excited no matter who that player is, but it would be pretty fun. I'm
going to throw one at you here. Obviously, this just completely making things up, but pick 129 there in round 4, Emmett Johnson.
He's your guy. Emmett Johnson.
Yeah,
so I was looking at their picks.
I mean, he's going to be your 0 RB star in 2026.
The tough thing about that, I was looking at their picks. They have 2 7th rounders, but they have no 5th or 6th. They do have an extra 2nd. So they're picking the first, 2 at the back end of the 2nd round. They have their pick in the 3rd. They have their pick in the 4th. They have 5 picks through the 4th round. That is a lot of higher end capital. But when you have no 5th and no 6th and then just 2 in the 7th, maybe you move back with one of those seconds to try to pick up a pick, a day 3 pick in the 5th or the 6th. A lot of times those day 3 picks, teams need them in the 5th and the 6th for a lot of different things, right? Special team stuff, whatever, depth at different positions. I wonder, so as I started talking about a running back pick and also you talking about a wide receiver pick as a little bit more of a luxury, will they just keep adding firepower? I mean, they could definitely add another receiver, and Khalif Raymond's more of your 4th. They're thin behind Adunze and Burden, but I wonder if they kind of are earmarking those first 5 picks for more specific needs on the defensive side of the ball or on the lines, because, and more the defensive line. Their offensive line, they addressed quite a bit last offseason. I think they brought in all new interior offensive linemen last year, if I remember correctly. But did their center retire or something? Is that anyway? I'm curious whether the lack of day 3 depth allows them to take maybe a luxury running back pick in the 4th round or something like that, or even in the 2nd round, right? Or a luxury wide receiver pick in the 1st round, because they're thinking, hey, we can't actually take like 2 DBs on day 3. We got to take our DB somewhere else, like whatever it is that they determine. It may be dictated by a lack of overall firepower. They do still have 7 picks. And like I said, they have 5 through 4 rounds, but 2 of them come at the, in the 7th round at the very end of the draft. A lot of times those are just not really viewed as very meaningful picks. There's a fall off on day 3 between like 4th and 5th round picks and 7th round picks. The Bears have 2 in round 7. They got to make a lot happen before that 4th round pick that you referenced. But yeah, I mean, I'm saying all that because I am intrigued by your vision that, hey, Ben Johnson's going to say, I need more firepower. I need more playmakers. I think he's smart. I think they're smart. I think he understands you can't expect perfect health. Right now, they do not have enough depth at wide receiver if something happened to Burden or Dunze or they don't pan out. And both guys do still have question marks. They do have a little bit more depth at tight end, but like, what if Loveland gets injured? I mean, you just don't have enough weapons right now. You had too many weapons, it felt like last year, but you traded away DJ Moore. That's where that second round pick came from. It wouldn't shock me, to your point, that they would go out and add a wide receiver and keep saying, look, we need more and more weapons. I'd love to see him add a running back, but can they do both of those in the first 5 picks that they have there before they pick again in the 7th?
Then their point at the running back position might be, yes, we understand that DeAndre Swift and Kyle Monangai are not exciting and they don't work that well for you in fantasy, but they worked great for us in reality. That's not one of our points of emphasis. I want to look at this Bills roster because, I mean, wide receiver seems like such a straightforward selection even after the acquisition of DJ Moore, and yet, I mean, it probably just can't happen, right? The team needs for Buffalo, and this is, I mean, I was very critical of Sean McDermott throughout his tenure with the Bills. I think if you're a defensive mind, your defense can't consistently let Josh Allen down in the big moments when you potentially have the best team in football. And yet you have to have that backing from the front office. And you have brought a lot of things onto the show suggesting that he did not have what he needed there. And you look at their team needs, it's basically everything on defense. If your entire defense needs, and it's not that you need to replace all 11 players, but you have needs in every unit and you have an overall lack of talent, and you only pick once before pick 91, right? You're going to have this pick at 26. You don't have a second round pick. The Bills just don't have a lot that they can do. And they do have a situation now where DJ Moore is kind of their new Stephon Diggs from the perspective of you make this trade acquisition. The guy is a sleeping giant. He blows up. You have Khalil Shakir as an elite possession receiver. You have still this tiny little hope for Keon Coleman, at least from the perspective of the front office. The new head coach is saying, yeah, we made that decision and we're going to be open a little bit here. You have 2, viable tight ends who can help you, not necessarily difference-making guys. And it doesn't seem like guys who can play a huge number of snaps, but you have some rotational depth there. You have Josh Allen in the running game. I guess the 126 here, the first round pick, seems like it's going to be a defensive player. They have to give their defense, I mean, you're not going to get the same type of impact as you would with the top 10 pick in all likelihood, but they've got to give their defense a chance to be the type of unit that can hold their own.
Yeah, I agree. I think you made a really good case there. The GMs love to say, well, we did have a second round pick. It was DJ Moore, right? They already, the idea that they already used that second pick to go out and acquire a wide receiver in DJ Moore to then draft a wide receiver first. You've now allocated both your first and second round pick this year to the wide receiver position. They traded that second for Moore. They immediately guaranteed whatever it was is, money in 2037 or whatever. They decided they're just going to give him more money in the future. I think it was 2028 money. They were like, yeah, it's not guaranteed, but we'll make it guaranteed. We're that confident in you. We just want to make you happy. They obviously have very high hopes for DJ Moore. That's fantastic. And I'm going to be in on him. We've talked about it. I mean, I'm excited about him for fantasy this year, but when you use that second round pick on him in the trade, as you were just talking through, you have too many needs on defense to not use the first now on that side of the ball. It would be a bit of a shocker, actually, if they went wide receiver there. Now that you say that, I'm intrigued. I'm very much intrigued as we talk through this first round in terms of what we're going to see happen.
And one of the things I had mentioned to you sort of at the top was that you have this group of receivers. And for most people, that's Lemon, Tate, Tyson, Concepcion, Cooper, and Boston. 6 names is a pretty decent number of names as you work through that first round. They do tend to be mocked within the first, say, 28 picks. But when you work through this exercise, I guess I'm skeptical that they all go in that range. I think it's more likely that we see at least one of those players, and it may not be the guy that you want if you're sitting there in the picks that we talked about as being tricky. You look at the Dolphins, do they get someone to come to 30 for them with the desperation? The Patriots, could they use that selection at receiver instead of making the move for A.J. Brown? When you're looking at the Jets back there at 33, when you're looking at the Titans at 35, I mean, those are teams that are desperate for the receiver with borderline first round value to come to them in the mid to early 30s. This exercise makes me think that's a little more possible than maybe I thought when we started.
Yep, that makes sense. Any other things that you kind of came to as we worked through this?
It's going to be a fun draft, as it always is. I think the tight end decisions will be fascinating. Stowers, someone mocked into kind of the early mid second round, but had extraordinary testing as well and has a couple of seasons of production. He could be someone who ends up being more valuable than those first round wide receivers. And I think is a little bit of a sleeper option for teams in the back half of the first round. We think about what the Detroit Lions did in that draft where they added Jahmyr Gibbs and Sam Laporta. I think that, you're probably not going to get Jeremiah Love and Stowers, perfectly set up that way, although it's not impossible if we're talking about a team like the Titans. But trying to add that tight end in that general vicinity has been something we've seen a lot of savvy teams try to do in the last several drafts. There are some interesting names at running back as long as you're not looking for a starter, right? So when we think about Coleman, Price, Washington, Johnson, those 4 guys especially, I think, will have a role in the 2026 season. And if you are looking for them as a committee type of guy, then that's something that probably works out a little bit better than if you are more in kind of that Seahawks situation where you don't have anyone who is viable for what you really need. Now, again, Charbonnet not expected to miss the entire season. But do you have some other teams as we work through this? Because the position is so barren, we didn't discuss running back much at all. Are there any squads through here where you would like to see them make a late day 2 or early day 3 pick just to bolster that running back room a little bit?
Probably. Not a bunch that jumped to mind immediately.
Because one of the things we talked about is those teams that are being projected to take Love, they actually already have the position covered. And so if you don't take Love, you're not going to be pushed then to take any of these other guys. And we're talking about other types of teams who'd be looking at the other backs.
I think the Vikings are low-key an interesting one. They already have some depth. They brought back Aaron Jones. They have Jordan Mason. But if they added somebody that had some juice, Jones, maybe not at 31, likely to play the full season. That could be an interesting spot. The Bears are, the obvious one where you kind of said the Bears didn't really prioritize the position. I think Ben Johnson's going to be looking for, his Jahmyr Gibbs in the coming years, and understanding that somebody who actually is additive at the running back position is a pretty crucial thing right now. I'm trying to think of good spots that aren't already blocked, and there's not It's not a massive number of running back openings.
In part because Emmanuel Wilson is now with the Seahawks. The Packers have an opening for their position behind Josh Jacobs.
Yep.
And he has been pretty healthy, but it's clearly not a lock that he would stay there. And if he would be out, that is an offense where the backup could have a ton of value.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I just had one and now I've managed to lose it. I mean, the Panthers, we're hoping for Jonathan Brooks, but I mean, there's possibilities where Jonathan Brooks is just never really able to get back on the field. And Hubbard got replaced last year by Rico Dowdle. We talked a little bit about Trevor Etienne last year, but if they added somebody with some decent capital, I mean, that would be an interesting spot. The Cowboys are still interesting. I mean, they brought back Javonte Williams, but he was good early. He kind of was a little bit more what you'd expect later in the year, honestly. Like, I mean, he was a lot better overall than I expected him to be, and I get why they brought him back. And I think he had a really exciting year, and that was great to see. It was awesome to see a guy who had such a significant knee injury come back from that. They pretty clearly don't like Jaden Blue a lot, so the Cowboys would be an interesting one as well. But yeah, Seattle, I mean, you talk about it with, I think Emmanuel Wilson's really interesting right now, but with just Wilson and Charbonnet coming back from an ACL, and Charbonnet as a talent, not somebody that we're like crazy high on already. I mean, anybody that Seattle adds is interesting pretty quickly.
The other situation where you certainly hope that it never comes into play is with the Raiders there and Ashton Genty, but they don't have a secondary runner who is viable if you have to go to the backup there. I would expect them to use one of their late picks on these guys as well.
A lot of these backfields do feel pretty set, which I do think is a commentary on what the league feels about the running back class, that there aren't a lot of teams going in thinking we need to add a third back or something like that. It seems like the majority of teams tried to address that to a degree. Like the Cardinals are a team you could bring up with James Conner and Trey Benson. They went out and got Tyler Algier, and now you have like a three-headed monster already. I know fantasy drafters are pretty high on Algier. Etienne leaves Jacksonville. They bring in Chris Rodriguez to add to Bashal Tutin, and they already liked LaQuinn Allen in the pass game, so you kind of already have the three-headed thing going there as well. The Texans bring in David Montgomery. They already had Woody Marks. That's a situation where I certainly still think the Texans could add, but they probably think they're somewhat covered there. I mean, there's several of these types of teams around the league where, I mean, the Bucs lost Rashad White, but they made sure to bring in Gainwell and retain Sean Tucker. So they still have the, two backs behind Bucky Irving, kind of a three-headed thing there. The Falcons don't, they lose Algier, but I mean, they got Bijan Robinson. There's either a star in a lot of these spots, or there are multiple options. There is depth there, other than some of the teams we talked about. Like Washington is the really clear one. They also brought in Jerome Ford with Rashad White. They do have Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt. They do still have Jeremy McNichols. I mean, they could theoretically go into 2026 with those four guys as their main running backs and try to make that work. It's not much different than what they did last year. And yet, that is the spot that you look at and you go, Jeremiah Love could just immediately play a ton and be a star and be super fun. But yeah, I mean, a lot of these teams, it feels like they were already thinking ahead this, through free agency and earlier in the offseason in terms of retaining certain players. Like the Bucs were originally potentially going to let Sean Tucker go. They ended up retaining him. Yeah, I mean, the Colts is another one. You have Jonathan Taylor. You like DJ Giddens quite a bit, but a couple of the like legit first round running backs don't have clear backups right now. But yeah, I mean, there's not a lot of spots out there which again, I think gets back to the league not really loving this running back class and thinking that they're going to be able to add somebody that can be a meaningful part of their 2026 plans necessarily.
The Lions don't have a 3rd round pick, but they have 2 4s, 2 5s, and 2 6s. Those picks would fit in the range where you could burn one on a running back that you didn't see as a difference maker, but did see as someone who would bolster your roster a little bit. You talked about how the teams have kind of protected themselves. They signed Isaiah Pacheco to a tiny contract. He is not a viable back. Really even to spell Gibbs at times, I would expect one of those late round picks for them to be at the position. And then, Ben, I'll just finish it out by saying we have the Seahawks again, as you've noted, as we've talked about. I would love for this pick to be, we know the NFL doesn't work this way. There's obviously no reason why it would, but your Washington Husky there, Jonah Coleman, staying in the Pacific Northwest. I think he's a perfect fit for the Seahawks. And if you can make the case that any of these guys are undervalued, which when it's a week enough class that basically we're just saying no value, right? He would be the guy I think is undervalued in the class.
Wow.
Perfect fit for Seattle. That's
a stealing bananas first. Shawn is in on a Washington Husky. I thought you just had something against like the colors purple and gold or something. I don't know. Or just like something in the air up here that you were convinced no athletes can actually progress from this. But Jonah Coleman, look, I think it's a good call. We talked about it early on. I made the comparison to Josh Jacobs before. He made it himself at the combine. He didn't run, probably wouldn't have ran well, but he does all the things well. He's a bigger back. He does eat up yards and get downhill, and he had a decent like breakaway run rate for a guy who probably isn't the fastest dude in the world. Catches the ball in the backfield, supposedly a great pass protector. I like what you're saying in terms of he makes it make sense for the Seahawks. They kind of have that mentality of we just want our running back to be able to do all the things and execute our scheme. Yeah, he's a fun one.
Your guy is, one of the things you got to like about him, he's smart enough not to run, right? He's like, that can only hurt me. It's like, I'm a big back. In 2024, he had a massive evasion rate, which you think about, and not all these guys have hit, obviously. This one of the reasons why the names pop out to me, but Zach Moss, David Montgomery, people were all over them because of these high collegiate evasion rates. You're talking about someone with 27 touchdowns in his last 25 games, someone who caught 87 passes in college, including 31 last year. This is the type of the guy who is a Mark Ingram type of player in so many ways, where, if you have that Alabama on your jersey or whichever program is the trendiest at the time, I think people talk about you as, a borderline first round pick, but certainly a viable day 2 pick. For whatever reason, Coleman, he's like, the main thing with him is like, he's not going to run. He's, like a 4.7, 4.8, like whatever, let your imagination run wild guy. You're like, not a viable NFL player. These aren't the most exciting plays, and we usually push back against them when they're highly valued. But, this is the profile that does play at the NFL level.
Speaking of what a college he wore, I have solved the problem for my fellow Washington brethren. Sean's still mad that the Huskies stole the Arizona Wildcats head coach. When Jed Fish came to Washington, he got Jonah Coleman to transfer over, who had started 2 years in Arizona. You are famously a big fan of the Arizona tennis team, softball team, not probably the world's biggest fan of their football team, but you can swallow liking a Washington Husky.
If existing, I would not even notice. Yeah, you bring that up. Almost 7 yards per carry as a sophomore in 2023 back at the U of A.
Yeah, there you go. You can stomach being in on a Washington Husky as long as he played 2 years at Arizona. Had his first 1,100-yard season there. Went on to have 2 more at Washington. Yeah, definitely a guy who put up numbers. Did a lot of different stuff in college. And he didn't have like massive usage. And yet that was more of a rotational like mentality with the coaches. He could have, and he did at times, carried the load. He was a guy like when they did kind of a hot handish thing. When he was rolling, he would roll. And then often he would not play in blowouts. Like Jonah Coleman was the dude in tight games and in first halves and those things. And then when they got ahead of teams, they would use other backs and those kinds of things. I'm just looking at it now, trying to see how much truth there is to that. I see that they're like some of their bigger losses his junior year, he didn't touch the ball a lot. The closer games, he tended to touch the ball more. His 220 carry games his junior year at Washington were close wins over USC and UCLA. And the week in between there, they lost 35-6. He had 11 carries. Like they just stopped using him. The week after that, they lost at Oregon 49-21. He had 11 carries. Some of that is, game script obviously related, but there's an element of it with them where they would go to other backs and things, especially when they were blowing out and beating teams. And I think that tracks with what I'm seeing in sort of his game long as well. I was just trying to make sure I wasn't making that up too much of a degree. He was a guy that they tended to rely on more in spots where they needed the guy like to be the dude. So anyway, yeah, I think the Mark Ingram note you had, the Josh Jacobs one I've said, I mean, maybe not the exact same player, but sort of that mentality of a guy who certainly could carry the rock. He didn't have a ton of huge usage in college, but wouldn't surprise if he had a little bit of that at the next level in the right situation. So yeah, Seattle could be that situation. I think that's a fun one. I'm hoping for that now, Sean.
So then we'll see where all this goes. We are just a week away from the NFL draft. Immediately following your FFPC, RV Triflex leagues, and standard leagues will be doing their rookie drafts. We know many listeners have their own leagues that follow similar formats. They will be drafting. Then I have some of my pre-NFL draft, rookie draft leagues drafting currently. Yeah, it's a great time to be alive. Everyone enjoy your football.
Yes.
That'll do it for us today. Stealing Bananas, then Gretch.substack.com. I'm Sean. Like I said, we'll have some content up on the site playing through the rookie guide. We'll have some strategy notes that I put together there. We'd love for you guys to grab that. We love you. We'll talk to you soon.